Good morning. How are we? Good? A little sleepy? Did everyone get their coffee this morning? We just need to get rid of time change. I just think we need to do that. You know, fall is nice because you get the extra hour, but spring is doubly worse when you lose the hour, you know? So I think we should start a petition. Righty, we're continuing in our series in the book of James. We live in a day and age of what I would just call noise. At every corner and in every moment, we are constantly surrounded by noise. Whether music, podcasts, TikToks, radio talk shows, Netflix, news, social media, we are constantly being communicated with. And it seems in all of this noise in our day-to-day experience, we have lost our ability to listen. And when I think about the future, this is one of the things that deeply concerns me. That anytime I open any sort of application, I'm immediately met with the shouting of ideological rhetoric. When I go to a restaurant, you see people sitting across the table, not looking at one another and looking each other in the eyes, but instead staring at screens. And before the older generations say, yeah, you young people, we've seen the same happen for you as well, as you guys have migrated your way onto Facebook, right? It's prevalent that's the case regardless of generation. When I talk to people about complex issues, each person seems to already have their talking points and theories set out. No matter what the complex issue is, they have their 5 points of response on how they're to respond to this thing based on these kind of inlets that they have in their lives. And it seems to me that as a people and as a culture, we have lost the art of listening. And every single one of us is guilty of this. How many times have you caught yourself in the middle of when someone's talking to you, suddenly realize you have not heard anything that they've just said, right? It's like the Charlie Brown, and suddenly you're like, oh snap, this person's talking to me, right? And so you try to piece together something, and if you have nothing, you say something like, for sure, or that's crazy, right? You know, just these generic response that no matter what they said, it could possibly fit into the template. And they're like, I know, right? And you suddenly realize you were not listening to something that person has said. Or how many times in the middle of a conversation, let's say one that's more of like a debate type or an argument type, as this person is bringing things forward, you're not hearing anything that they're saying, you're just building the argument back in your mind, right? You're like, point A, you're wrong here. Point B, you're wrong here. So as they're talking, you're not thinking and listening to what they're saying, you're building your response in the back of your mind. How many times have you been in a conversation with somebody, and as you're talking, they're on their phone? Yeah, dude, totally understand that, whatever, right? I had a friend who was notorious for doing something like that. Even mid-sentence would just pull out the phone. It's like, am I that boring, right? That in the middle of my sentence, you have to check to see what's happening on Instagram. You see, each of us have this deep desire to be heard, but none of us is willing to do the hard and important work of listening. Each of us has this desire to be heard, but none of us want to do the hard and important work of listening. And this is not only damaging in our relationships to one another, but it's also damaging to our relationship with God. Our inability to listen is robbing us from the life that God has for us. Because listening is a key element of what it means to be human. So let's discover a little bit about this ideology of listening. You have been listening as one of the first things that you do ever in your development. They say that a baby can begin hearing as early as 18 weeks in the womb. And as far as up to 26 weeks, they could hear noises inside of mom and outside of mom. And this is a surreal moment if you're a parent. You remember those moments of talking to the baby in the tummy. And I remember Ben and Judah both talking to my sons and seeing them move and kick. And there's this surreal moment that they have yet to come into this world, and they're already hearing the voice of their dad and their mom. That one of the first things that we do is that we listen. And there is something to be said that before you could ever speak a word, you have months and years of listening. Listening is at the center of what it means to be the people of God. Our relationship with God is rooted in listening. Think about it. When you decided to follow Jesus, what was it? Was it something that you saw? Was it something that you touched? No, it was something that you heard. You heard a story about a God who created this wonderful world that we live in, how he made you in his image and likeness. And even though we chose to rebel against him, he made a way for us to be with him, that he sent his son to come and to take our death and to give us his life, that he was crucified and buried and 3 days later rose from the grave, and that the power that raised Jesus from the grave now lives inside of me and you. And that resurrection life is offered to us. And that he's coming again and bringing his kingdom with him. What brought you to Jesus was not something that you saw or something that you touched, but it was a story you heard about a man who died for you. You listened your way into the kingdom of God. At the center of Jewish faith was this call to listen, what they called this prayer the Shema. And for thousands of years, Jewish people have prayed this prayer out of Deuteronomy 6, verses 4 through 5. They say this: "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, with all of your soul, with all of your strength." What is the first word in that prayer? Hear or listen. Shema in Hebrew. That's what they got the name of this prayer. And Jesus in his messages even would close his messages with the phrase like, "To him who has ears, let them" what? Hear. There's this call in the scriptures for us to listen, to hear the words that are being proclaimed out loud. The scriptures were first heard before they were ever read. All these teachings of Jesus were first heard, proclaimed out loud before they were ever written down and read. All these letters that you're seeing written to the churches were first read in a public setting like this before they were ever read in an app or in a book. All of this stuff is meant to be proclaimed, listened to. But this idea of listening is not just allowing sound waves into your ears, right? We all can do this. We can hear what someone said, but not actually be listening, you know? You might have the ability to hear what someone says, repeat back to them what they said, but weren't actually listening. Listening is both about hearing and doing. And this is the biblical framework that the biblical authors have when it comes to listening. Listening is first a choice to hear what is being said. Listening is first a choice to hear what is being said. Adam McHugh says this: "Hearing, generally speaking, is one of the five senses, the one that centers our ears and our brain's processing of the sounds it receives. It is involuntary and momentary. Hearing is something that happens to us. Sounds force our attention, and we only then instinctually, but listening is an act of the will. In listening, you center not only your ears, but also your mind, heart, and posture on someone or something other than yourself. It is a chosen obedience." So listening is first a choice to hear what is being said, and second, it is a choice to obey what's being said. In the Hebrew word Shema, it is both the same word for listening and obeying, the two sides of the same coin. So if I would tell my son to pick up his dirty laundry and to put it in the hamper, right? He would shema me by not just hearing me yell from him, "Son, pick up your clothes," but then to actually go do and put the clothes in the bin. That is shema. It is both listening, hearing what is said, and obeying. And this is what the biblical authors have in mind. The word that we have, the English word we get from obedience, literally means to listen from below. To hear from below in like a lower status and to respond, to obey. And Jesus had a whole teaching on this, on the reality of the soil of our ears, our posture towards listening. Mark chapter 4, it's going to be on the screen for you guys. It says this: "Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake, and a crowd gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and set it out on the lake. And while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge, he taught them many things by parables," which are stories. "And in his teaching, he said this: 'Listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed, and he was scattering the seed. Some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell in rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly, but because the soil was shallow, but when no sun came, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so that they did not bear grain. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up and grew and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times. Then Jesus said, 'Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear.' When he was alone, the 12 and the others gathered around him and asked him about the parables. He told them, "The secret of the kingdom of God has been given to you. But to those who are on the outside of everything, it is said in the parables, so that they may be ever seeing but never perceiving, and ever hearing but never understanding. Otherwise they might turn and be forgiven." Then Jesus said to them, "Don't you understand this parable? How then will you understand any parable? The farmer sows the word. Some people are like seed along the path where the word is sown. And soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them. Others, like seed sown on rocky places, hear the word and at once receive it with joy. But since they have no root, they last only a short time. When trouble or persecution comes because of the word, they quickly fall away. Still others, like seed sown among the thorns, hear the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of wealth and the desires of other things come in and choke the word, making it unfruitful. Others, like seed sown on good soil, hear the word, accept it, and produce a crop, some 30, some 60, some 100 times what is sown. In this story, Jesus is talking about our ability to hear his word, our ability to perceive what he's saying. Now, Jesus is strategic when he teaches in parables, because when he teaches in a story, the story is an invitation. Jesus is not coming and just proclaiming theological information. He's inviting people into a story. And only those who are actually listening will understand what he's saying. But if you're just a bystander looking for the information, you're going to miss it. And Jesus is doing that on purpose. Because he wants people who are hungry for him and who have the ability to listen to do such a thing. He says that people have ears, but they can't hear. They can hear, but they can't understand because they're not actually listening. And Jesus describes 4 different types of soil, right? 4 different types of postures of listening. The first are those who just reject it, who don't hear it altogether. And the enemy comes and takes their ability to listen through distraction. The second is those who hear the word and let it penetrate a little, but the second struggle or persecution or hard time comes, they throw it out the window. The third type of person is those who hear the word, but it's suffocated out by the subtle power of seduction. That the world entices them in and suddenly they are choked. That the seed that was trying to grow and spring out was choked by the weeds of the world. And the last is those who really listen and become fruitful. There, I believe, are 4 hindrances to us being able to really listen. The first, I believe, is that we're surrounded by noise. Many of us find comfort in the nonstop noise, which seems to be a little strange, all this overstimulation of the brain. We've lost the ability to listen because we are drowning ourselves out in noise. My theory, and I'm not alone in this, is that many of us struggle to listen because we are afraid of what we might hear in the silence. So we drown out our lives with noise. The second hindrance, I believe, for us is the shouting of insecurity. Many of us struggle to listen because we are deeply insecure. We live in a world where you're only as good as you are seen and heard. We have to have the best stories, the funniest jokes, the wittiest responses, and constantly giving commentary on every little thing. And what we are really longing for is the security to be seen and loved, but always feel the pressure to have to say something. And the most insecure people I have met are the ones who talk the most and listen the least. We are constantly competing in these relational dynamics to have something to say, the funniest joke, the wittiest response, the most, culturally appropriate response to every single thing, instead of taking the posture of listening. Because we're insecure. We want to fight our way to the top of the relational order by being needed, being seen, being heard. The next one is that we struggle to listen because we're afraid of change. We struggle to listen because we are afraid of change, because listening requires us to be open to change. God has done a deep work in my heart, specifically in this area of listening. When I think about who I was 5 years ago, Andrew thought he knew about the world and knew about how all things work. And me, I'd say today, I basically feel like I know nothing. As you get older, the more you realize you don't know about a lot of things. And I've seen this manifested clearly as a microcosm that a guy posted on Facebook under this guise of listening and asking a question, which was seemingly an invitation to conversation, right? He put out this question, and he put it out there for those who politically disagreed with him to explain why they supported another political ideology. And one of his friends commented on the post and responded with a simple and nuanced answer as to why he came to the conclusion he came to. So this guy puts up this post saying, why did you guys agree with this political ideology? Well, a friend of his comments and says, here are the reasons why I agreed with that. Simple, nuanced, clear to the point. The guy then responds to that post with paragraphs of reasons why the other person who responded was wrong. And I loved the friend's response because here's the one where you click comments and it's like, we're just people arguing, right? But he simply responded with this. He said, I'm sorry, there must have been a misunderstanding. I thought you were asking a question to hear what people wanted to say, not using this as a platform to try and persuade us to believe what you believe. And that's the problem, is it not? It's under the guise of listening, so why do you believe that? Oh, here's why. Interesting. Well, here are all the reasons that it's wrong, and I started this PowerPoint presentation of why all the reasons that you're wrong, and why there's a flaw in your thinking, and why you're wrong here, and here, and here. It's like I was under misunderstanding. I thought we were having a conversation. But this is a microcosm of the larger experience about how we speak to one another. Look, whatever you believe about politics, here's what is clear. Jesus calls us to love our enemies. And one of the first ways that we love them is we listen to them. We really hear them out. Here is what you find. If you choose to take an opportunity to listen to someone you disagree with, you'll find out they're a person just like you. With family, with friends they love and they care about. And most people want good for the world. They just disagree about how we get there. Most people are actually very compassionate. And though you still may leave disagreeing, when you truly listen to someone, you can no longer demonize them. When you truly listen to them, you see them as what they are, a human being. There's a powerful story about listening. This guy by the name of Daryl Davis, a black man, who helped lead over 200 KKK members to disavow their allegiances and turn in their hoods. How? He listened to them. He began by creating these spaces where he'd go and he'd meet and he'd talk with these guys and he would just hear them out. This people, this group, the KKK, notorious for killing, hating, subjugating his people to horrible acts. But he chose to give them a seat at his table, invite them over for dinner, and listen. And since creating that space, 200 turned away from that idolatry, turned away from that ideology. That is the power of listening. Through conversation and through friendship, he led them out of the KKK. Think about how radical of a move that is. That is the power of listening. He made himself vulnerable to hear these people, how they got to where they were, why they believed what they believed. And he showed them the kind of person he was and how he loved them to turn and change their mind about the ways they believed about the world. The last hindrance, I believe, is our divided attention. A real challenge to listening well is distraction, right? You can be physically present without being there. You could be physically present and your mind to be somewhere else. And technology has eroded away our ability to listen, to be present with one another, and this is essential for listening. Let's see what James has to tell us about listening. Verse 19, he says this, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this, that everyone should be slow to speak and quick to listen, slow to speak and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." So the first thing James tells us here is take note, listen to what I have to say. Followers of Jesus are to be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. A mark of maturity in the life of the believer is directly associated with the ratio that they listen and that they speak. I know I'm around somebody who really knows Jesus when they're not fighting for a place in conversation, looking to one-up someone's story or commanding the scene, but when they take the posture of listening. when they are far less concerned about what other people think about them and far more concerned at what treasure of conversation is buried in the people they are with. I know that somebody has been marked by Jesus when they're marked by the posture of listening. When they're not fighting for position, they're not fighting to get their voice heard, they're content listening to what is being said around them. All the introverts are all, amen, you know. But listening is truly this mark of maturity. Now, I know that when we're talking about having these conversations about listening, I know when I can hear the critics in my mind of what I've been saying, right? Well, we have to take a stand. We have to tell the truth. We just can't sit back and listen all the time. Listening to someone does not mean you agree with everything they say, but it means that you love them. It does not mean you agree with everything that's said, but it means you love them enough to hear what they have to say. If you love someone enough to listen to them, it means that you see them. You really see them, not as an idea to debate or a wrong to right, but a person who is worthy of love and respect. The Proverbs say this: fools take no pleasure in understanding, but delight in airing their own opinions. Man, if there is not a word for our culture today, it is this. We are constantly concerned about just airing our own opinions, unwarranted, unasked for. Here's what I'm thinking, you need to hear me. The proverb says that person is a fool. Somebody who's deeply rooted in the life with Jesus is secure enough to listen. It has been famously said, people only care what you know when what? They know that you care. And I would add, they know that you care when you listen to them. You gain a place to speak into someone's life when they have first felt heard. How many of you have ever changed your mind when somebody came and just spewed their ideas at you? Anyone? Didn't think so. Maybe, right? How many of you have actually had your mind changed when you felt heard? When they're not just here are the 17 reasons you need to believe about this, this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Did you watch that YouTube video? Did you see that link? Did you listen to that podcast? You're like, dude, overwhelming. But when you actually felt heard, you're engaged in a conversation. And in that conversation, hearts are changed. You're heard, they're heard, a bond is built. This is why for us at Zion, our evangelism strategy is not necessarily just proclamation, but it's relationship. Because we believe people are not convinced in the kingdom, they're loved into the kingdom. They're listened into the kingdom. And we believe that that posture produces genuine disciples. Though just proclamation can get response, listening and relationship produce disciples. Now, not that the other is bad, we just think one is better and more fruitful. And if we look at the world, what would happen if followers of Jesus took the posture of listening? I don't know if you feel the way that I do, but it seems that sometimes followers of Jesus are just talking way too much, right? We're just trying to command the scene, trying to propagate things out there, and not taking this posture of listening. When we look at the life of Jesus, we see that Jesus' life was also marked by this trait of listening. You know what Jesus would do when he'd get a crowd? He'd send them away and go to a home. When someone would come up to Jesus, he would get to their level if it was a child or somebody sick or ill. There was constantly times where Jesus was shrinking down the conversation so that it could be had over a table, over a meal, together in person. You know what Jesus did with his enemies? He invited them to dinner. You will read throughout the scriptures that he's eating at the Pharisees' houses. He's eating at the tax collectors' houses. He's eating at the prostitutes' houses, because that's how people are loved into the kingdom. Not Jesus just saying, you're all wrong, I hope you know that, but saying, let's go get a bite, man. Tell me about your life. What have you been through? What's going on? I have something that can help with that. That kind of a heart posture. For us to become more like Jesus, we must become people who love by listening. Eugene Peterson wrote a translation for his congregation called The Message, and I love how he commentated on this passage. He said this: "Post this at all the intersections, dear friends. Lead with your ears, follow with your tongue, and let anger straggle along in the rear. Because God's righteousness does not does not grow human anger. So the first heart posture we must have is be quick to listen. The first thing we rush to do is not speak, but hear what's being said. Listen to understand. Hear what's actually being brought to the table. And the second thing we're do is we're slow to speak. You know that you're having a thoughtful conversation when the moment you end your sentence, the other person doesn't start, but there's a pause in the middle as the person is thinking about what they want to say in return. We are so fast-paced, going at 1,000 miles an hour. Our conversations are even the same way. I know that I'm already a fast talker, but right, you get with more fast talkers and it just amps up even further and further. And if there's any minute of silence, it's awkward because we're not comfortable with people gathering their thoughts for a response, you know? Are you going to say something? Do you have anything to say to that? Are you going to respond? I'm just putting my thoughts together for a brief moment. The next thing we're to be is slow to anger. James encourages us to be slow to anger because this anger does not produce righteousness or right relationship with others that God desires from us. Anger is the right response to injustice and wrongdoing, but how we respond is crucial. Jesus at times got angry, i.e., when he was turning the tables over in the temple. Jesus was not like, excuse me, please, thank you. You know, he was angry because of what they had done to his father's house. But that was a righteous anger. Often, if we could be honest, we're not angry about the things that God is angry about. We're angry about the things that upset us, you know? It's this guy cut me off. That's not the concerns of the kingdom, you know? That's not something that God is passionately against. It's injustice and wrongdoing that should bring anger to us, right? But when we are quick to anger, that type of anger typically leads to poor decisions. When have you gotten angry, allowed yourself to get angry, and responded, and it paid off great? Right? Probably never. You said something you shouldn't have said. You did something you shouldn't have done, right? You modeled yourself in a way that you didn't want to represent yourself. When you respond in anger, it usually always backfires. I've never heard somebody who says that they've done that their whole life and it's turned out for the better, right? But this anger that has, it's slow to anger. And this is even how God describes himself, his character to Moses. When Moses asks him to define himself, he says that he is slow to anger. Long-suffering, patient. He's not riled up really quickly. And we live in a time and moment where everything's inflammatory, where we are very quick to anger. You post the wrong thing, you use the wrong term, you do the wrong thing, anger instantaneously. This is not the posture of the kingdom. We are slow to anger. We are gracious to others because we see them first as a human being, not as someone to debate or to point out their flaws or to condemn. Especially us as the church need to be modeling this well. James goes on to say this, therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. James says, for us to get rid of all of this junk that's inside us, it is by receiving the word planted in us. So meaning, we receive God's word. He's drawing on the imagery that Jesus used in the sowing of the seed. Did you catch that? The seed that is planted in you, this word that is planted in you. He's drawing on that teaching of Jesus to bring our minds back to that place. And he's saying, for us to become the kind of people who look like Jesus, we have to be the kind of people who humbly receive the word, which means we listen to the scriptures, with that definition of listening being hearing and obeying. The scriptures are fundamentally an invitation to a story. It's not a rule book for life. It's not a recipe for how to live. It is a story that's inviting you into its claims. It is a story that has the power to save us and to change us. And the scriptures exist not just to inform us about God, but to woo us into himself. Eugene Peterson says this, when language is personal, which it is at its best, it reveals. Revelation is always formative. We don't know more, we become more. Our best users of language, poets and lovers, children and saints, use words to make intimacies, make character, make beauty, make goodness, make truth. This is revelation personally revealed. The scriptures are this invitation to come and see, to come and behold, to come and survey this story and leave changed. And as you come and you enter into the story changes you. It's not just information. It's not just a book of theology that, all the nature characteristics of God, page 37, okay, good, nice, kind, right? It's not like that. It is a story that is revealing God to us, revealing his heart, and inviting us to partake in the story that he's telling in the world. It is an invitation. Come and see, come and hear, come and experience life with him. Scott McKnight says this, what we are looking for in reading the Bible is the ability to turn into the two-dimensional words on paper into a three-dimensional encounter with God. So the scriptures are this invitation to transformation. That as you read them, you are changed. And as you hear them, as you listen, and as you obey, you are changed. James goes on, verse 22. He says, do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law, i.e. the scriptures, that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. For us to listen to Jesus and the biblical authors, it means for us to do what they say. The scriptures are an invitation to see things how they actually are. The scriptures function as a mirror. A lot of us woke up this morning exhausted, tired because we lost that extra hour of sleep. Did you get to catch a look at yourself in the mirror before you started getting ready, right? There's a thought that comes in your mind. Do I really look like this in real life? Like, do people really let me look like this in real life? I feel bad for my spouse. I'm like, she woke up to this, like looking like this, smelling like this, I was like, oh my gosh. Because a mirror tells you the truth. Filters lie, right? Filters take away a little bit of the double chin, make the eyes pop a little more. Whatever. Filters do that. What does a mirror do? Tells you the truth. Bro, you got pimples, your hair's jacked up, you got 2 boogers, and you got crusty lips right now, all right? That's what's happening. It tells you the truth. And this is what the scriptures are. The scriptures function as a mirror, saying, here, take a look. And what do we most often find when we look in the scriptures? Dang, I look like that in real life, People let me live like that. This is the purpose of the scriptures, is to come and to see yourself as you actually are. Not how you perceive yourself to be. Not how you proclaim yourself to be, but how you actually are, because the scriptures get to the heart. And James says, when we look in the mirror, we have one of two options. One, look and go, ooh, and go away and say, not looking in that mirror again. Or two, he says to stare intently at it. To look at it for an extended period of time and allow yourself to see yourself as you actually are. To confront your shadow side, to confront the flaws and the failures that you have. If your understanding of the scriptures and you leave reading the scriptures feeling comfortable, you're not hearing the scriptures. You're just not. There's no way you can just even read the Sermon on the Mount and be like, yeah, I'm cool with everything said there. Because if you're truly reading it and you're looking at your own life, it's uncomfortable. It's painful. Hebrews defines the word of God as a sword that cuts between marrow and bone, right? That's not nice. That's not good. When you're confronted with the scriptures, it hurts sometimes. When you hear Jesus teaching to love your enemies, you're like, but Lord, she's so difficult. You don't feel good about those things. When Jesus calls us to radical generosity, but the stimulus check just came in, It doesn't feel good. It's not comfortable. But it's what we're called to look intently into the mirror and see ourselves as we actually are and see things that actually matter. And James says, and do what it says. So when you're confronted with the reality of how things are, not just to be like, well, that's really unfortunate, but to then say, okay, now what must I do? Now how do I then respond? It's going and getting that person who frustrates you, who's your enemy, a cup of coffee and bringing it to work from. It's taking that money and saying, Lord, this money is yours, and giving generously. It's doing what he says. You know what James says? If you do that, what happens? He says you'll be blessed. You'll realize that you're living life how it was intended to live. It doesn't feel good at first. It doesn't feel good to love your enemies. It doesn't feel good to be kind. Those things don't feel good at first. But as you do them, you get to experience what life and life with God is like. And at our church, I say it all the time, we don't want to talk about it. We want to what? Be about it. We don't want to be a church who plays games and sings songs and claps our hand and gives some money and does some good things. We want to be a church that is changed by Jesus and changes our city by the way that we live our lives. We want to be a church that what happens in this room fundamentally shifts what happens in our city. We want to be a church that is accurately representing the heart of God to the world. That's the church that we want to be. So that means we're going to have to take looks in the mirror. And I don't like it half the time, you know. When I'm wrestling with the scriptures, I'm like, God, is this really in your word? Do we really have to go over this? Can we go around this part? I'm easy to get quick to angry, Lord. I don't really want to talk about that. And the Lord confronts us. And he calls us to a new way of living. The call for us is to look intently and allow the scriptures to change the way we see ourselves. And to then go and obey. It's easy to hear the teachings of Jesus. Oh, that's good. Love your neighbor. Yes, Lord. And then you get in and drive into your garage as fast as you can. It's easy to do those. It's easy to hear those things. It's harder to do. But Jesus says that's the same thing for you to be a person who listens. James goes on to say this: those who consider themselves religious yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongue deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. As I told you guys, James functions more of like a coach instead of a motivational speaker. You know, he's going to get your face and tell you, you're losing. If you don't get it together, it's over, you know? And a good coach will do that. They're not going to come and say, oh my gosh, you're doing so great. We're down by 65, but hey, effort counts, you know? He says, hey, get it in gear. Let's go. And he says, look, if you think that you're religious, but your tongue is just setting fires everywhere. You say whatever you want. You come to your mind, and when people say, hey, bro, that was not nice or not kind, you're like, I am who I am. I'm not going to change for anybody, you know? If you're that kind of person, he says, your religion is worthless. He says, please stop claiming the name of Christ. It's worthless. Stop playing games with yourself and others. It's worthless. A mark of a follower of Jesus is the taming of the tongue. And we'll talk about that at another week. So prepare. But he then says, religion that God accepts is taking care of those in need and keeping ourselves from being polluted by the world. It's taking care of orphans and widows. At Zion, we take that literal. There's an orphanage here in town that we partner with, El Ranchito de los Niños. I want to encourage you, outside of the partnership that we're already doing as a church, as individuals and as community groups, we continue to partner with them. Because there are kids there who don't have parents, who don't have people who raise them and love them. They're being raised by relatively strangers. And they need to know that they have a heavenly Father who does not give up on them, who has not forgotten them, and who sees and hears them. And so as a church, we take that serious. We've had opportunities as a church to take care of those who are in financial need, who are struggling in light of the pandemic and all that stuff. We've been able to help partner and provide meals and different things to help families get along. We take this serious. It's not something that we just say, yeah, that's a good thing to do, but we actually do it. But outside of that, outside of what we do collectively as a church, as an individual, that's your responsibility, is to take care of those in need, is to respond with radical generosity, is to love the people around you. And the second half of that religion that really pleases God is this: to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. It's easy to become polluted by the world. It's easy to become enticed. It's so easy. They are manufacturing algorithms to keep you enticed into your phone. They have people that are getting paid buku bucks at Apple, Google, Android that are trying to keep you addicted to your device. that are trying to keep you addicted to the information, the conversations. YouTube's algorithm, right? This is why you get into the black hole. Because you click on one video, and before you know it, there's 27 other videos that you also might be interested in. And are you almost always interested? Yup, you know? And so what was supposed to start off as a quick tutorial to learn how to do this thing ends up into 7.5 hours, and you're going into JFK conspiracies and all this other kind of stuff. It's designed that way on purpose. The notifications on your phone are designed to give you this shot of serotonin, of joy every time you get a ping. And even if it's just an email from something that you subscribe to that you're like, how do I get off of this thing, you know? Even if it's something like that, that little ding invites you back into your device. Our culture, all of its advertising, everything that you see, the Carl's Jr. ad, this, that, is all trying to entice you, invite you into something. You are being fed a story. You are being fed a narrative. You are being enticed into something. And James says, pure religion looks like not getting entangled in any of that. Seeing things for how they actually are. You want to know how you see things as they actually are? You look in the mirror. You behold the story. And you start to see, oh, that's pretty sketch. You know, like, that's not good. Man, and honestly, in the last year, I've been grieved at how followers of Jesus have responded. I've been grieved to my core that they serve as pawns for other people's agendas, whether political or otherwise. They've been enticed into continue to advance the rhetoric of hate towards one another. And it grieves me, and more importantly, it grieves God. And so our call as a church is to take the posture of listening. People should feel comfortable at church because they know that they are heard. They're not being judged. They're not being condemned. They're not being told all the things they need to do. They're being heard. And the only way that this happens is not if I come up here and talk about it, but if we listen to that and obey. So the call for us as the church is this, to go beyond the noise of the culture and our preferences and to listen to the whisper of God in the scriptures and the words of one another, to step into who God is calling us to be. We must take the posture of listening. Now, I believe this is happening right now. God's word has gone forth, and he's met you today, and you're faced with a choice. You're beholding the mirror. What are you going to do? You could leave here saying, well, that was nice. That was a good talk. I appreciate the coffee, you know. We'll just go on and keep doing business as usual. Or you say, man, Lord, I want to be somebody who listens. First and foremost to you. First and foremost to the things you have to say. Because I'm hearing so many things. There's so many messages being said. There's so much noise in my world, God. I don't want to hear any of that. I want to hear first from you. And then to open your eyes and to look to the people around you and say, Jesus calls these people my brothers and my sisters. He calls them my family. And I want to be somebody who doesn't just come in here and consume and get the things that I want and leave, but comes and contributes. And the way that I do that is by hearing and listening to my brothers and my sisters. Their aches, their pains, their worries, their hurts, their joys, their celebrations, and everything in between. Hear what they have to say. Encourage, respond, and love them well. That is the choice before us. God is speaking. The only question is, are you listening? Jesus, we come before you now. And God, we ask that we would be people.
Thank you, Zion City family, for joining with us watching online. We are so happy that you were able to. Make sure to send that link to all your friends, family, and loved ones, someone that you think would love to hear this message. We do believe that God is speaking to the city through this sermon. And we'll see you next time.